Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into a movement that really left its mark on history.
It really did.
German Pietism.
Yeah.
And our guide for this journey, Dr. Douglas Shantz,
Yes.
and his book,
Yes.
An Introduction to German Pietism,
Yeah.
Protestant Renewal at the Dawn of Modern Europe.
Perfect.
So I think when people hear pietism, they often think of, quiet piety.
Right.
But as I was reading this book, it's like, oh no, this had a much bigger impact.
Absolutely. It really did. And I think you're right. People tend to associate pietism with just kind of like being pious, being quiet.
Right.
But Shantz really helps us see it's so much bigger than that.
Yeah.
So it's through this lens of social reform, education even, and like the rise of global missions that you really see how big this movement was.
Yeah, it's almost like this undercurrent that, bubbled up and influenced all these different areas of history.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this book, for our listeners who are really wanting to dig into this era, so valuable.
Absolutely. And Shantz is, he's a leader in this field.
Right.
And he's done such a good job, I think, of giving us this really accessible, but also really thoroughly researched overview of this movement.
Right.
Which is, it's not easy because we're not talking about like a simple thing here. It's really multifaceted, and he's really good at, I think, teasing those apart in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, because how do you even begin to define something like that? Like German Pietism, it's like, where do you even start?
Maybe you start.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's so great about the book is he starts right there.
Okay.
That is the challenge he takes on. So, right from the beginning, chapter 1, he's like, what is pietism? And he kind of connects it to this kind of rumbling of discontent, I guess you could say, that was already happening within the Lutheran Church.
Okay.
This sense of like, we want a more authentic faith. We want to really live this, not just, go through the motions. And he points to people like Johann Arndt, who was really influential early on, who emphasized this personal transformation, really connecting with God on a deeper level.
So it's almost like it emerged as an answer to something very specific that was happening at the time.
Exactly.
Yeah, because history doesn't just, things don't just happen in a vacuum.
Oh.
So what was happening in Europe at the time that made this fertile ground for something like this to take root?
Right, right. And he does a really good job, I think, in the book of weaving in that historical context. Because the timing of this is really crucial. We're talking about 17th century Europe. This is, the 30 Years' War has just, or is kind of, it casts such a long shadow, obviously.
Right.
But imagine the devastation, the questioning of faith that's going on.
Right.
This real yearning for meaning amidst all of this chaos.
So it's almost like this perfect storm.
Right. Yeah.
Of, we have society reeling from all of this conflict and upheaval.
Right.
And then you have this movement that's like, no, it's about personal piety. It's about
deeper connection.
This deeper connection with God. It's I can see why that would be appealing at that time.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that, scholars still debate is did pietism come about because of these tumultuous times, or did the times make pietism necessary?
Right.
And he really wrestles with that in a way that I think is really helpful.
Okay. So we have this backdrop of, unrest. You have these early figures like Arndt calling for a more authentic faith. But where does it really gain momentum?
Well, this is where he takes us to Frankfurt.
Okay.
And we're introduced to Philip Jacob Spener, another really, really key figure in the Pietist story. And, he writes this book, Pia Desideria, which is it becomes the Pietist manifesto.
A manifesto. Yeah. Okay, now we're talking. What were these radical ideas that he's putting out there?
And they weren't necessarily radical in content, but they were radical in practice.
Okay.
So, he advocated for things like small group meetings.
Okay.
Intense Bible study.
Okay.
A renewed focus on living a really pious life.
Right.
Charitable work.
Okay.
But doing it as an expression of your faith. So it's it's not just these ideas. It's no, this is how you actually live it out.
Right.
And these practices start to spread.
Right.
Like wildfire.
It's amazing, how quickly ideas can catch on, especially when they resonate with something deeper, I think, in people.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's what's so fascinating is this wasn't just like theological debates in the ivory tower. It was about changing how people lived.
Right.
It's practical.
It's about application. But I can't imagine everyone was like, yay, Pietism, this is great.
Oh, absolutely not.
Right.
No.
Like there had to have been people who were like, whoa, 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 hold on a second here.
Yeah, this is stepping on some toes.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's where, like in chapter 4, he gets into like the conflicts.
Yeah, that
start erupting in Leipzig.
Yes.
Where another figure comes into play, August Hermann Frank.
Yes,
right?
Frank.
Yeah.
Big player.
Right. Okay. So tell me more about that.
So this is where things start to get interesting because, you have these small groups that Spina was talking about, these conventicles.
Right.
They become really, really vital now because you have pushback.
Okay.
So it's like it forces the pietists to kind of go a little bit more underground, right? They have to find ways to connect. They have to find ways to support each other, right?
Yeah.
Because they're facing opposition.
So it's like this spiritual underground.
Yes, it is.
Okay. I like where this is going.
Yeah.
So what happens? Does the opposition, does it squash the movement? Or does it have the opposite effect?
Oh, it totally backfires if they were trying to squash it.
Oh, how so?
It actually has the opposite effect. Because now it's like, okay, we're kind of under siege, so we have to band together even more closely.
Right.
And these conventicles, they become even more important because it's a place where pietists can go and be with like-minded people.
Right, and feel safe.
Exactly, yeah, and feel that support and encouragement to keep going.
Yeah.
Even when, maybe the larger church context isn't quite as welcoming.
Right. It's like they're finding strength in the face of this resistance.
Absolutely, yeah. They're like, we're not backing down. Right. We're just going to find a different way to do this.
And it's interesting how Shantz highlights that, throughout the book, that this isn't just like a theological debate.
Yeah.
It's really about lived faith.
Exactly. It's about what does this look like in practice.
Right, and challenging the status quo a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's where Hallie comes in,
right.
which is chapter 5.
Yeah.
This is where things get really, really tangible.
Okay.
Because now we're not just talking about ideas, we're talking about institutions.
Okay.
Hallie becomes this, hub for social reform under Frank's leadership. And we're talking orphanages, schools, publishing houses. I mean, they're really putting this into action.
Yeah, it's like they're creating a model for what a community transformed by faith could look like.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, so it's not just, about these grand institutions. It's also how did this actually impact individuals? And I'm particularly interested in the context of the 17th, 18th centuries.
Yeah.
Women, how did this impact
That's such a good question.
their lives?
Yeah. And that's where I think this book is so valuable for scholars, especially who are interested in that, in gender dynamics of this time period. One picture.
Okay.
Because you have, on the one hand, you have traditional roles of the era, right?
Right.
But within Pietism, you see women finding new avenues for religious expression and leadership, particularly in the conventicles.
Right.
They're really active in education, even in missionary work.
Okay.
So it's this interesting tension, right, between the constraints of the time, and then these new spaces that are opening up.
So it's almost like they're creating space for their voices to be heard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's driven by, I think, their focus on personal experience, which also then feeds into how they approach scripture, which Shantz talks about in chapter 8. Pietism and the Bible. That's huge, right?
Yeah.
This is central to who they are.
Right.
And it's not just about blind faith.
Right.
Or just accepting what the church authorities say.
Right. It's about that personal connection.
Exactly. It's about personal study. It's about wrestling with the text. It's about making those direct connections with God's word.
And it's interesting how that also I mean, obviously it impacts their missionary activities, which we're going to get to, but it's they're almost democratizing faith.
Yes. Putting it in the hands of everyday people.
Right, exactly. Okay, so we've talked about how it impacted Germany.
Yeah.
But this is where I think we get into the really global impact.
Yeah, it's not just confined to Europe.
Of Pietism.
No.
Right. Because you mentioned earlier that it didn't just stay within those
comes the pun.
The confines of Germany.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. In chapters 6 and 9,
Yeah, so this is where Shantz...
He goes beyond,
He takes us beyond Europe,
yes,
and he's looking at South India, he's looking at Labrador.
Wow.
And this is where you really see Pietism's global reach.
Okay, so from small conventicles in Germany to, sharing their faith.
Across continents.
Across continents.
I know.
What drew them to those particular regions?
And that's what I think is so, so good about this book.
Okay.
Is that he doesn't just document it, he's like, why?
Okay.
Like, what was it?
Yeah.
Why these places? Why South India? Why Labrador?
Yeah.
And it seems like they were really drawn to communities that hadn't yet really encountered Christianity.
Okay.
So places where they felt like they had something to offer.
So almost like an element of, we have this truth.
Yes.
We want to share it.
Yeah, and this is part of our responsibility.
Our mission.
Yeah. And what's so interesting, too, is they were really intentional about learning local languages.
Oh, wow.
Learning local customs.
Oh.
So there's this, real sensitivity, at least in some ways, to the cultures they were encountering.
So it wasn't just like, here's Christianity, take it or leave it. It was more like...
It was more nuanced than that.
Okay.
At least in how they approached it.
Okay, so let's shift gears just for a second and bring this back to our listeners.
Okay.
You've mentioned throughout this conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why this book... I mean, it should be required reading.
I think so, yeah.
For anyone who is really interested in early modern Christianity?
Absolutely.
So for researchers who are listening to this, scholars, what makes Shantz's approach so valuable?
One of the things I really appreciate about his work is he's really balanced.
Okay.
He doesn't shy away from the complexities.
Okay.
He acknowledges both the positive contributions of Pietism, but also some of the criticisms that have been leveled against it.
Okay.
So he's not trying to present this, rosy picture.
Right, he's not romanticizing it.
No.
He's giving you the full picture.
Yeah.
And recognizing, too, that there's a lot of diversity within Pietism itself.
Okay, so we're not talking about this,
monolithic
entity.
Oh, no. And I think for researchers, that's key.
Okay.
Is that he's not saying, this is what Pietism was. He's saying, look at all these different threads.
It's a starting point.
It is, yeah. He's like, I'm going to give you the tools.
Yes.
I'm going to give you the context.
Yes.
Now you go and draw your conclusion.
Yeah, it's not like he's just delivering a lecture. He's inviting us into a conversation.
Exactly. And I think that's so true, especially in the final chapters.
Okay.
Where he's talking about the legacy of Pietism.
Right.
He's not just leaving us back in the 18th century.
Right.
He's making these connections to the modern world.
Okay, now you're really making me want to, bump this up my reading list.
It's so good.
So how does he connect Pietism to the present day? Well, he makes this really compelling case for Pietism's influence on, everything from evangelicalism to modern individualism, this emphasis on personal faith,
right,
a direct connection with God, social responsibility. These are all themes that, they echo through contemporary Christianity, even secular society.
It's like those seeds were planted back then.
Yeah.
And they just grew into these sprawling...
Yeah. And they keep branching out.
Yeah.
And you don't always see, the connecting lines.
Right.
But they're there.
And it makes you wonder, what would those early pietists gathering in their conventicles, what would they think if they saw?
If they could see where it went.
Where it went.
Yeah, I know. It's really something to think about. And that's what I love about this book, is it's not just here's a history lesson. It's no, it sparks all these questions. And it makes you want to keep
digging.
Digging, yeah.
It's he's given us this key and we've opened this door.
Yes.
And we're like, oh, it's not just one room. It's this whole...
It's a whole world.
Yeah, this labyrinth.
Yes.
Of all these interconnected ideas and movements.
Absolutely. Yeah, and for researchers.
Yeah.
Especially, I think, for folks who are interested in those intersections of faith and culture and social change.
Yeah.
This book it's a gold mine because he gives you this really rich, tapestry of evidence. It's meticulously researched, it's analyzed.
Right.
But then he kind of steps back and lets you
take it from there.
Yeah. You say, what do you see?
Yeah. So it's like an introduction to German Pietism.
Yeah.
It's more than just a title. It's really
an invitation.
An invitation to the whole world.
To delve in.
Yeah, exactly.
And I highly recommend accepting that invitation.
It sounds amazing.
It really is a good read.
Okay, well, it's been so great.
Yeah, this was fun.
Taking this deep dive with you today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And listeners, if you want to uncover like all the intricacies of German Pietism, check out Dr. Shantz's book. And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.